Zoom decided to have a moment.
Oops.
Hope you all had a good bank holiday weekend. Yeah, so this is in lieu of yesterday, where it was nice and sunny. Sat on patio all day. I hope you are all well. We'll just let a few more people in. I assume that everyone can hear me and see me, and I'm not just talking to myself. If you could chat in the chat box here, that would be fantastic. Let me know that I'm not going bonkers. Cool. So let's see if it's looking a bit more palatable. Is it? Can you all see my screen? Okay. Right, let some more people. So this evening, we are going to talk about task 4 of the advanced bookkeeping exam, which is another one which students do struggle with. It doesn't have a, it's along with task 3, it's got quite a low pass rate nationally, I should say. It's because basically it's got correcting journals. Students don't like correcting journals. The reason being is you can't just learn it. You have to figure out what's gone wrong, what should have happened, and the journal is the difference from A to B. You can't just learn it like you do, like posting from the sales daybook, where it's just debit, sales ledger control, credit, sales, credit, VAT, because that's what you do. That's what you don't do. It's thinking on your feet, which people don't like. Just while I have you, I'll introduce myself. My name's Nick Craggs. I'm AAT Distance Learning Director at First Intuition, Team FI, as we say. And just while I've got you, I won't plug it too much, but that is the PQ Award for Online College of the Year, which we won this year. And in honour of that, we have 25% off our online live, whole level, bookkeeping, and even single unit courses as of today. So if you've got any units you want to finish off, potentially, because there could be some exams coming soon, you know, get in touch, please. Anyway, that's the last of me shamelessly plugging that. Well, probably not the last of me plugging it, but I'll carry on. So what we're going to look at is task 4, obviously. Next week, by the way, will be Monday night. We're going back to Monday night because we do it on a Monday night, and I didn't want to sort of clash with any other sessions, because there was so many sessions on. I presume you've all seen, we've now got advanced synoptic. I presume we've got signs for that. We've done added personal tax, added loads to the schedule. Cool. So without further time wasting, let's have a look at AAT sample assessment mock 1 task 4. Can we all see this? Let's more people in. So task 4, as it says, is all about accounting adjustments. You shouldn't need to know that. It does say that, but you should know this. You've done lots and lots of question practice. So again, we've been told the year end, which is 31st of March, is not as important in this type of question. It's not one where they sort of test you and you might get it wrong for getting the year end wrong, but it doesn't do any harm to get it clear in your head as to what you're looking at. So let's work through it. I'm not a great fan of jumping around questions and going from B to C to A to 1 and vice versa. You know, there's 5 tasks. If you don't do very well on one, you're probably going to, not pass the exam. So you've got to do them all. So I'm going to start with task 1, work your way through. Just be conscious of your time. So it is a relatively big task, 23 marks. 1.2 minutes per mark. So roughly you want to be spending about 28 minutes on this, which is quite a lot of time, in my opinion. It is tricky, but it's not over time pressured, I don't think, this task. So the first thing we've been asked to do is the allowance for doubtful debt. So this needs to be 1% of the outstanding trade receivables. Now we've tried to, we haven't, the examiner here has actually tried to confuse you. They do this in this exam a lot. They use a lot of different terminology. So if we are looking at our trade receivables, what figure in our initial TB, which is this bit here, should we be looking at? Because trade receivables doesn't appear in here. That's right, yeah. So we're looking at the sales ledger control account, or debtors, or trade receivables, whatever you want to call it. That do this. So sometimes, I think we talked in, for those who were with me for task 2, about diminishing balance depreciation. It's the same thing as reducing balance. They just like to confuse you and use lots of different types of terminology. But you're right, it's the sales ledger control, and we want our I'm not going to do that with a calculator, even I can do that in my head. We want our bad debts to be 1% of this figure. So 1% of 17,900, that's the figure we want, is 1%. We've gone up 2 knots of is £179. However, that is not the question that we've been asked. We've been asked, if we get our rubber, to calculate the adjustment. So £179 is what we want it to be. The adjustment is how we go from what we've got. So we've already got a figure here of £225. We want it to be £179. So that's our opening balance based on last year's sales ledger control. Presumably if it was 1%, it must have 22,500 in their sales ledger control. Anyway, that doesn't matter. We've got what we've got, which is an opening balance of 225. It needs to be 179. So we're going to reduce it. So we've got 2 figures here, 2 accounts here. One is the allowance for doubtful debts. Now that is the provision, and that should be the figure that we want it to be, 179. And that will offset the sales ledger control account to come to a more realistic figure of what we think we're going to get paid. So of the £17,900, we think £179 of that will go bad. So our allowance for doubtful debt needs to be £179. Because it's a provision, it's a credit, offsets the debit for the sales ledger control. We need to reduce that credit. So to reduce that credit, we're going to debit it with the difference. So the difference between 225 less than 179 is £46. So we're going to debit the allowance for doubtful debt with £46, and then the adjustment. So the adjustment is the movement that goes in the profit and loss. That will be a credit because it is actually going to increase our profit for this year. There's been a debate where this appears in the P&L. Some people put other income. It's not other income. It really isn't. Well, they were doing a bit of debate, but I think everyone's wrong. It should be a negative expense, because if average out the accounts over the years, you'll have had an expense when you brought the provision in, and then you'll have a negative expense when you reduce it. It's not income. It really isn't. But anyway, that's just a debate. I would put it as a negative expense. So we have debited the provision with 46. So that's going to bring that down to 179. And then the movement is going to be the 46. So that's the figure we've asked for, is actually the 46. That goes in the profit and loss. Yeah, it's just not income. It's not. It's basically just reducing a previous expense. So moving on, that is part A. We've now been asked to look at some further adjustments. So it says that you'll not need to enter adjustments on every line. You'll never do that, because that's just crazy. You'll only get a few adjustments because there's only so many adjustments you can make. So we've got an error of commission. It's gone in the wrong account. Here we've got a single-sided transaction, and we've also got a error of transposition. There's only 5 errors you can make, so you're not going to get 10 adjustments, because we're just testing the same thing twice. So yeah, if you can correct 1 error of commission, you correct 100 error of commissions, you're not going to get loads. Also, never ever in an ETB or a question like this, put zeros in. So just don't do it, because you just leave them blank. Don't put zeros in. It's wrong. Really? Anyway, so the first one is purchases of £984 have been posted to the office expense account rather than purchases. It's an error. So basically, what should have gone into office expense has gone into purchases. So we've not been told anything about the bank side. The bank, unless we're told otherwise, must be correct. So the original entry was it's been posted to purchases. It must have credited the bank and debited purchases. The bank is fine, let's not touch the bank, but purchases got a debit of 984 when it shouldn't. So we need to get rid of that. So to get rid of the debit of the purchases, we're going to enter a credit. So 984 will go in here. And obviously it needs to go into where it should be, which is office expenses. So to increase an expense where it should have gone, we enter a debit of 984. Now, those of you with me a couple of weeks ago, I think I was ranting about always enter your debits first, which you should do. Here we're not doing journals, so it doesn't really matter, we're just looking at the overall picture. But when you are into correcting journals, as you'll see down below, we will enter our debits first. So that's that one. That's the relatively more straightforward one. So the next thing we're going to look at is a prepayment. Now this is tricky. The prepayment has been correctly posted to the credit side, but there was no corresponding debit entry. So we would have had a credit for 450 and no debit for 450. So we have a problem. Our initial balance, trial balance, would not balance because we got a credit and no debit. So we have to get the TB to balance. If TB doesn't balance, you can't do anything. T-bar. Someone's just asked me, was it possible to show a T-bar? Do you mean a T account? I can put them in T accounts. You will get working paper, unless you're sitting at home, where I believe you don't get working papers. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So a T account is, we'll do them down here. And we'll have suspense up here. So that's suspense. What is it? It's prepayment for airfares. Airfares, put it there. And that's our prepayment account. So what should have happened, I'll tell you, let's go with what did happen. We had a credit that's been posted correctly. So when we enter a prepayment, what we do is reducing the expense because we paid it in advance. We don't want to show that expense in this year. It belongs in the following year. So in theory, we should debit prepayments because we've got an asset of an expense we can use in the future, and then we credit the expense account because we don't want to show that expense. So what we've got is a credit of 415 airfares. That's right. We haven't got a debit. So we need to get it to balance. So we're going to enter a debit of £450 just so our TB balances. Then we can carry on with life and we'll come back and sort this out at a later date. So we now have come to that later date. We need to correct it. So what we're missing is the prepayment element. And we obviously need to get rid of suspense. So what we're going to do is debit prepayments to recognize we have the asset of that airfare that we paid in advance. So we debit prepayments and then we credit suspense and we'll get rid of that suspense account. So suspense has now gone for this error anyway. And then we've correctly got the prepayment of 450 to recognize the assets. So we should put them in our accounts up here, 450 for prepayment. So that's a prepaid expense. And then we're going to credit suspense with £450. Is everyone okay with that before I delete these T accounts? Because I'm going to use the T accounts for the next one. I'm going to take silence is compliance is a term I learned last week. So I'm going to do that. Oh yes, if it's been posted to, well, if it's been posted to sales expenses, yeah, you would, but we don't need to adjust the airfares. They've given you the sales expenses accounts there. It's called enough rope to hang yourself, because you could post it to sales expenses, but you don't need to. We don't touch that. The actual credit side, we reduce sales expenses properly. But we don't need to touch it. It's fine. So all we need to do is touch the suspense account and the prepayments account. So we've told, well, I wouldn't say we, the nasty examiner has told you that these costs are classified as sales expenses. That's only so you can see, sales expense account, they must have told me that for a reason. Must need a post in there. You don't. The correct credit, well, the credit was correct, if you follow me. So that's why we've given you that, but just to trick you. There are quite a few red herrings in this unit. So the next one is an error of transposition. You don't need to know what these errors are called. That's level 2 bookkeeping control stuff. Even then, learning them is a little bit sad. So the next one is plan to cost in the general ledger correctly shows a balance of 24,500. So that's the figure in our main ledger. However, when we transferred it across, it's 25,400. So the 4 and the 5 got swapped over. So we're looking at an error of £900. So instead of debiting the ledger, let's bring it up here. So this is a plan to cost with 24,500. We've got a debit of 25,400. So we've debited the TB too much, well, to the tune of £900 too much. So we've got a debit of £900 in plant. So let's do our T accounts again. Plant. We'll have suspense here. And what will be the other one? We won't have another one. We'll leave it as that. So what we've done is we've debited plant by 25,000. That's by £900 too much, and so we've got an extra £900 of debit. So to get our trial balance to balance, because the trial balance must balance, we're going to put a credit of £900 into suspense. That's just so our TB balances. Our TB balances get on with life, and we'll come back and sort it out later, which is what we're doing now. So now we've spotted the error. These errors are sometimes a nightmare to spot. In the exam, you won't have to do that. You will be told the error, so don't worry about that. We've now discovered that the planted cost should be 24,500, and so it's too much. So that is where the £900 suspense is. So we're going to get rid of our suspense. We'll debit suspense with £900, and then we credit planted cost with £900. So that will bring our suspense. So we've got 25,400. If we put 900 in there, that will bring it down to the 24,500 that it should be, and then debit £900 to suspense. Now, we've done our 3 corrections. We think it's all right. A really good way of checking is our suspense account, has it gone? So we've had, initially we had a credit of 450. We've debited it with 900, credited with 450. So in effect, we have debited it with £450. The suspense account has gone. So in your exam, whenever you do anything like this, if your suspense account hasn't disappeared, you have done something wrong. You'll never be left with a figure in suspense that doesn't relate to the errors in your exam. So that's a good check that your entries are correct. For the first one, don't we need to reverse the 904 from office expenses and debit purchases? Yeah, quite right. Yes. Read the question. It should. So I read it as it's been posted to office expenses and rather than purchases. It should have gone to purchases, not office expenses. So the reversal, you're quite right. If we get rid of that, we want to. So if you look at here, so it was purchases. All right, get rid of that. It was purchases, but it went to office expenses. So the reversal will be get it out of office expense with 984, and then debit purchases with 950. We want to increase purchases. RTBQ, always read the question and get it clear in your head that that's what he's asking for. So they were originally purchases, but they were posted to office expense, not the other way around. Spotted. Cool. Is any questions with those 3 adjustments? They're the tricky ones in this question. take that as a no, and we'll move on. So the next one is, yeah, as soon as you've got where you've got to bring in suspense, it goes get tricky. Now, the question, other thing to bear in mind is, if you've got an error, but no matter what it is, if you've got an equal debit and an equal credit, you will not need a suspense account. Or if you've got an error where nothing was posted, you do not need a suspense account. The only time you need a suspense account is if you've got an unequal debit and credit, be that one's a different figure to another, or one side is missing. Only then do you need a suspense account. Don't always go throwing suspense accounts in because you don't always need them. There's always a tendency of, it's a question on advanced bookkeeping, we've brought in suspense accounts, we need to get rid of them. Yeah. T accounts for suspense account, make sure that you end up with a zero balance in your suspense account because it needs to go. So the next one is the journal entries to close off the rent account for the financial year and select the appropriate narrative. So rent account is what we want to do is close it off the years, basically take that balance carried down that we've got so far in our rent account and transfer that to the profit and loss account. And effectively what it means is these debits that end up in the profit and loss account offset the credit of sales, and the net figure is the profit, and that's the figure that goes into the capital account, which is sole trader gets to keep as their reward for all their hard work. So rent, as you can see here, is a debit. So we need to get rid of that account, that balance in that account. So when we start on the first day of the next financial year, there'll be nothing in rent because all that rent belonged in the previous period. So we want to get rid of that figure. So that will be a credit, but we always enter our debits first. So the first one is to the profit and loss account, and we'll debit that with £14,800. And then we're going to credit the rent account because then that rent account will be empty with £14,800. I should say you will have these drop down boxes. You don't need to come up with the accounts. You'll just get to choose. There will be options for incorrect ones because that would be far too easy if you didn't. Likewise with the narrative, there is the drop down options of the other one. If you put it the other way around, do you mean if you were to credit the P&L account and debit rent, that would be incorrect because you've then increased the rent account and then credited what we want to do is close off this account so it's empty. So at the start of the next financial year, it is empty. So anything we put in there is rent for the following year. So basically, when you look at your trial balance on the first minute of the first day of the next financial year, all your balance sheets, statement of financial figures accounts will have figures in. So the first day, people will owe you money, you'll have bank stuff in your bank account, you'll have assets. But at that point in time, you won't have made any sales, incurred any expenses. So all the accounts that go in the profit and loss account should be empty. Now, in the exam, if you were to credit rent first and then debit P&L account, the AAT give you the marks. It's a shame because it's wrong, but they do. But that is what you need to do, is debit the P&L account and credit the rent account. And conversely, if it's a sales account, it would be, you've got to debit the sales account to clear that off and then credit the profit and loss account. But the narrative, you'll just pick out the right one, which is to write the expense off to profit and loss. You just get to choose the correct one. That's that. And then finally, you can't avoid it, unfortunately, got a bit of ethics. Let's have a look at ethics. You can't really avoid ethics, unfortunately. So the manager has reviewed the resulting figures in the draft accounts. He's concerned that the client has significantly understated irrecoverable debt. So that means they are showing that they are going to get paid more money than they're likely to do. And your manager thinks this needs further investigation. Now, the client is pressing to get the final accounts completed for what she describes as an important meeting. Might be borrowing money from the bank or something, doesn't really matter. And any further investigation will mean that her deadline cannot be met. What do we do? Well, let's start from the bottom up for a very good reason. Complete the accounts by the deadline without any further adjustment because the client's need must take priority. No, you are obviously you are working for the client. Don't get me wrong, you're not working for the taxman. However, you have to operate within the law. You cannot, under the concept of prudence, disregard overstating your sales ledger control. So that's clearly bonkers. You do not do that. You've got to operate within the law. Complete the accounts by the deadline without any further adjustment, as any change is unlikely to be relevant to the meeting. A bit more likely, but what is key here is that it is significantly understated. So it's not like a minor thing, which was not going to really affect the, let's just say it's the bank. It's not going to say change the bank's opinion. So say if they had a set of accounts with one with adjustment in and one without, if the decision is going to be the same, it's not going to make that much difference, but it's significantly understated. So you can't do that because it is going to be relevant. So we're not doing that. Next one is investigate the collectability of debts and delay completion of the accounts because clients will have overstated the importance of the meeting. That meeting is irrelevant. That's not your problem. You don't care if it's important or not. You've got to do the accounts. That's your job. So we're not going to do that. So the last option is investigate the collectability of debts and delay completion of the accounts as any adjustment could affect the outcome of the meeting. That is correct. People are relying on your work, and if it is significantly understated, you can leave yourself open to a claim. I know you're preparing the accounts for the clients, but if you know, you don't need to do this for the example, if you know people will be relying on your accounts, you have a duty to care to all users of the accounts. And if you know the bank can rely on, the bank will be looking for you. So that's the answer to that. Any questions on Mock 1? Do we think that was relatively tricky, average, easy, anywhere in between? Straightforward. Yeah, it's not too bad. And it's only 7:30, so we're relatively within time. Right, let's move on. This is another completely different layout, but the theory is the same. And remember, RTBQ, read the question. So, task 4, again, it's 23 marks. That never changes. Now, we work as accounts technician, 31st of March, year end. A trial balance has been drawn up, and there is a suspense account. And we need to make some corrections. So, we've already got a suspense account, and the reason being is there must have been some errors previously where the debits and credits didn't match. So, we need to correct that. But it's not going to be every single question. I promise you that. It's going to be some and not others because we are also testing not only can you correct a suspense account, but can you correctly identify when you need a suspense account. So remember, the rules are if it's an equal debit and credit, even if it's an error, you don't need a suspense account. If there's any difference between the debit entry and the credit entry, there will have been a suspense account entered. So let's have a look at the first one. So a refund, now be careful, it is a refund. So that is money coming back into the business. So it's not an electricity expense, we're not paying money out, it's money coming in. Now, it's a refund for £398 for electricity costs. It was correctly entered into the bank account. So in theory, nope. There may not be a TB. There is no set format for these type of questions. All we get told is this is what's going to be assessed. We don't get told how or what question type. You could basically, the examiner is free to choose any question type that they want. Drag and drop, link the box, multiple choice. I mean, they tend not to just go all multiple choice for an entire task. It's relatively easy. I mean, you can at least guess. But no, there is no set format. All we get is learning outcomes that are assessed in a task, and it can be anything. So we base our material on the AAT sample assessments. So we get 2 tasks to look at, and we just got to sort of base it on that and mix it up a little to sort of prepare you. We don't get a sort of exhausted list of question types for each task. We just go on what possibly could, and as a student, you've got to be able to adapt. And you've got to be able to sort of answer the question no matter what format it comes in. So now we're entering journals. And again, debits are important. So a refund of £398 was correctly entered into the bank account, and there were no other entries. So the original entry would be, we would debit the bank with £398 because we've got more money in the bank account. Now we have no other credit entry. So there would have been a credit to suspense of £398. Is everyone happy where the £398 suspense credit comes from? Cool. So we've now identified the error. We need to sort it out. So what we're missing is a credit to the electricity cost account because we want to reduce that expense, because previously we would have debited it when we paid the electric out, but we paid too much. So we're going to credit electricity cost account. And obviously we want to get rid of our suspense account. So a nice debit there will balance that off and that will go. So you're going to debit suspense with 398 and then credit electricity with 398, and that will get our electricity account correct, and it will also get rid of that initial suspense. So that is part A. Part B, machine repairs of £470 were paid using the business bank debit card. So i.e. it's going to go straight out of the bank. The correct amount was credited to the bank account, but this was debited to the machinery cost. So it went to machinery cost. It should have gone to machinery repairs. The bank bid is fine. So the original entry would have been credit the bank. Fine, let's not touch that. But it was debited to machinery cost. It should have been debited to machinery repairs. So that's where we're going to go. We're going to debit machinery repairs. Again, you've got drop-down boxes here, so you just choose the correct count. So machinery repairs, and that was £470, and then we're going to credit the machinery cost because it got a debit and it shouldn't have done, and then that will get machinery cost account correct. That's an error of commission because it's gone to the wrong type of account, but we've not been asked that in this question, so it doesn't matter. Now the next one is a good question. So entries for prepaid equipment hire of £460 were made. These were on the correct sides of both accounts. So the prepayments got in correctly, but they went at £640. Now you can, if you're clever, just adjust for the difference. But we've been given 4 boxes here. And I always think in the exam, don't be clever. Make sure you get it right. So what we're going to do in this thing, rather than just correcting the entry that was already there, we're going to get rid of the original entry and then enter the correct entry. So when we enter a prepayment, what do we debit? So we're going to have prepayment, and this is for equipment hire. That's right. So we would have debited, well, with the prepayment, when we enter it correctly, we would debit the prepayment because we've got an asset of an expense we paid in advance that we can use in the future. And then we would have credited equipment hire. So what we did was debit prepayments with 640 and then credit the expense account with 640 because we don't want to show that expense at all. Now, the easiest way to make sure you get this right is just reverse that. So that would be debit equipment hire with 640. So equip hire with 640, and then credit prepayment with 640. So that's got rid of the original error. Now we want to enter the correct entry because now there is no entry in our accounts. We just removed it. So to enter the correct prepayment, which should be £460, we want to put prepayment and equip hire. So the correct entry would debit prepayment with 460 because we've got an asset of £460. We've paid for the equipment hire in advance. We can use it in the future to make money, or maybe get our money back. Either way, it's an asset. And then credit the equipment hire, because in this year, we don't want to show that expense. So you want to credit equipment hire with 460. So the entry would be prepayment for 60, and then credit equipment hire. Again, you get drop down boxes, you don't have to squeeze it in with a pen, with £460. So we now correctly, and we've now entered the correct transaction. If you've got a box with 4 and it's correcting an original entry, just get rid of the original transaction and then enter the new one. Don't try and get clever and just adjusting for the difference. I know in the real world you might do that, feeling confident, but you're in an exam. Don't take chances. So the next one we've moved on is no entries have been made for interest due. So the first thing we see is no entries. There's been no entries, so we can't have an unequal debit and credit. Therefore, we have no suspense account. So we don't have to deal with suspense at all. So let's not worry about that. So no entries made for interest due, i.e. it is still to pay on the loan of £5,000, and the annual interest is 2.8%. Now, the first question is, how much interest should it be? Yep, you're right. Everyone's got it right. It's £140. So that's the interest. The next thing we need to do, we've got two transactions. One is we have incurred interest. One is an expense. So we need to recognise that. The other one is we haven't paid it as yet. It is due. So we have a liability. So you've got a 50-50 chance. Which one are we going to debit, the expense or the liability? Now I'm going to type it in because I'm putting it into my debits first. So we're looking for the debit transaction. Yeah, Natalie and Tony, exactly right. We're going to debit the interest expense or charge, whatever the options are in the drop down, with £140 because we have incurred that expense. We will have to pay it in the future, but we have incurred it in this period. So we're going to debit that with 140. And then we need to credit a liability account because we need to show that in the future we've got this to pay. So we'll go with interest due of £140. So that is now our journal to bring the interest charge and liability that we've incurred for the loan. How were those for journals? Students tend not to like journals. Pretty okay, not too bad. Cool, good. Yeah, if you're getting them right, not only will you do well in this exam, but this is the sort of thing that comes up again in financial statements in tasks 1 and 2. It's just really, really important. It's also the sort of thing that comes up in advanced synoptic as well, in the ethics side of it. So it's something that people do an awful lot in real life. So it's not serious, so it's well worth make sure you get it right. So now we have come towards the ethics side of this task. So we've now posted journals and we're pleased to see the suspense account is clear. We are pleased. So we can now complete the following sentences. Basically, the options are I can or I cannot. Can you conclude that the balances included are now free from errors? Our TB is balanced and we have no suspense account. Yes or no? Can we conclude that the trial balance is free from errors? That is exactly right. I can't. The reason being, the trial balance balances, what that shows is that we definitely don't have an error, or we definitely do not have an imbalanced error. So if it doesn't balance, we definitely do have an error, but if it does balance, it doesn't mean we definitely don't have one. So you might have a transaction missing that we've not spotted. The trial balance will still balance. You might have an entry much like our one where we put it to machinery cost rather than machinery repairs. It's still balanced, but it's still an error. So the TB balancing doesn't mean that there is definitely not any errors, but it doesn't say that there definitely is, if you follow me. And then last one, yes or no, can you conclude that the inventory valuation at the year end is included in the trial balance or not? Now remember, what's the double entry for entering closing inventory? It's the same answer, so I assume everyone's answered it. So the entry for, that's right, Becky's statement of financial position. Becky's exactly right. The double entry would be debit closing inventory in statement of financial position, i.e. it's an asset of you've got some stock that you can sell. It's a good thing. And then we credit closing inventory statement of profit and loss because it offsets the purchases to actually show the amount that we've actually used during the year. So we've got an equal debit and credit. So the fact the trial balances doesn't say whether we've entered it or not, because once we've entered it, it's still balance. It's not like open inventory, which is just a debit. So no, you can't assume that inventory is in there or not. You couldn't tell. The last bit, ethics. You're an accounting technician, you're in an accounts, and you have to record adjustments. Which one of these would be acceptable professional behaviour if actioned by you? Now, a client wants to improve his profit figure, don't we all? He asks you to bring forward the date of a large sales invoice into the current year. Is that the sort of thing as an accounting technician you should be doing? Yes, no, it depends how much the bonus is. I'm glad you all said this. No, that is not what you should be doing at any means. That is horrendous, and it will get picked up on by either the auditor or HMRC. Yeah, don't do that. Now, the firm needs to meet its deadline for preparing final accounts. Your supervisor tells you to save time by using net realizable value for all your items in inventory. Do we do that? No, we do not do that. We value them at cost because net realizable value is what you think you can get if you sell them. You don't know what you can sell. You got the concept of prudence. The last time anyone paid any money for them is when you bought them, so that will be what they were last traded for market value. So no, don't do that. A client sales manager wants you to accrue for a bonus based on the current year's sales. The bank statement shows that the bonus was actually paid in the next financial year. Do we think we can do this or not? So it's based on this current year's sales, and it was physically paid in the next financial year. Yeah, so under the prudence, we did actually incur this expense of a manager bonus because they obviously did the sales. We did physically pay it out, so it does exist. So we are going to allow that because under the matching concept it belongs in that year. Now I know it says which one would these be acceptable, but it's always a good idea to look at the last one, because if that one's also you think it's acceptable, you might put the previous one right. Now, one of the client's credit customers is going out of business. Alarm bells should be ringing. The debtors are probably overstated. Yeah, Angela, it is the matching principle. It is bringing the expense into the period in which it's incurred, irrespective of when it was paid. So last one, client's customers is going out of business, i.e. these people who owe them money are going to go bust. So debtors, probably going to need a bad debt charge in there. Now, you feel this news can be disregarded as the effective date of the business closure is after the year-end date. So the business is going to go bust in the future. So should we be showing these debts as valid debts as at the year-end? Natalie is entirely right. In fact, I'd probably go as far as to say it shouldn't even be a doubtful debt. It should be a bad debt. If you've got notice that they are going out of business, you're not going to get anything for it. It should actually be written off. Also, you could put a specific bad debt provision against it. Remember, in your exam, when you are calculating the general bad debt provision, you deduct specific bad debts first before you calculate your general provision. So what does everyone think to task 2? Because we are well ahead of time. So relatively straightforward. Bear in mind, this is one of the more tricky ones in this exam. Yeah. So these are the mocks that AAT you've got. I mean, the questions you will get in the exam will obviously clearly be different to these, but the format, you know, it couldn't be mixed up, but the concepts are still the same. You're going to get journals. There's no way about it as some form. You might have to enter them as debits and credits like we do. It might be in a TB like before, but the principle is still the same, is two things. A, can you correct an error? And B, don't assume that every error has a suspense account, because the other thing is not only can you correct it, but also we're testing, do you know when you can you need to use a suspense account? And remember, to like back here into this exam, there are red herrings to trip you up. It's not, we try not to make it all that prescriptive, because then it's just a lot easier. So things like this, class for sales expenses, that's great, but we didn't do that one. Natalie, can you go through example 1, doubtful debt again? Of course. So it's this one here, actually. Find my mouse. Let's get rid of all this. Get that out of the way. So we need, let me just clear all this away so we can start again. Get rid of that. We don't want that. Get rid of that, and get rid of that, and get rid of that. So the first thing is, we already have a opening allowance for doubtful debts here of £225. So that's our opening balance. We then need to calculate what that figure should be. So it should be 1% of the sales ledger control account, which is down here. So 1% of the 17,900 is £179. So that's what we need it to be. It's already £225. So we need to actually bring it down to 179. So the difference is 46. So a provision for bad debts is always a credit, because it always offsets the debit here of the sales ledger control account to come down to a amount that that we think is realistic that we're going to get paid. So, Susan, that is exactly right. The 225 is the provision from the previous year. You won't need to calculate that. You'll be given that. And all you're doing this year is calculating what this year's should be and then adjusting the opening to come to that. So in this case, we need to reduce our opening. So it's always going to be a credit is your allowance for doubtful debt. So we've got a credit of 225. We need to reduce it down. It'll still be a credit of 179, but it will be lower. So we're going to debit it with 46. And then the allowance for doubtful debts adjustment is the movement for the year that goes in the profit and loss. So that will be a credit because it's going to increase our profits for the year because we actually reduce the amount of debts that we think are going to go bad this year. We think we're going to not lose as much. So if it'd been the other way and we'd wanted to increase it, the double empty would have been credit allowance for doubtful debts. So credit on the credit increases it, and then debit the allowance for doubtful debts adjustment because it's an expense and we've increased our bad debt provision. Cool. Anyone else got any questions? Next week will be Monday night, will be 7 o'clock. It will be task 5, which is the last task of the advanced bookkeeping exam, which is an extended trial balance. I like extended trial balances. Yep, we can do this again, the airfare. Let's get rid of that. So it was that one there. And what else to do? And it obviously goes to suspense. Let's go to that. Start again. So a prepayment of £450 has been correctly posted on the credit side. So we're going to have 3 accounts. So we're going to have suspense. Now, they told us that it goes into sales expenses. We not cut, well, I don't want to ruin the surprise at the end, but we're not going to touch sales expenses. And then prepayment. So the original entry would be, or should be, We've paid for airfares in advance. We can use them in the future, make some sales. We've got an asset. So we should have debited prepayments with 450. And you should credit sales with 450. So, because we want to reduce the expense of sales expenses because we haven't incurred it. So we would debit prepayment with 450 and we credit sales expense. Now, the credit side has been correctly posted. So that would have been done to £450. And that's fine. But that's where we stop. So we need it to balance. So if we debit the 450 to suspense, our trial balance now balances. So now we carry on with life and move on. Yeah, Sandra, if you email me nickcraggs@fi.co.uk to remind me it's 8 o'clock at night, I will email you over the recordings for task 2, task 3, and task 4. So just email me nickcraggs@fi.co.uk and I'll sort you out, Sandra. So Sarah, good question. We don't choose the prepayment account. In theory, we should have done. We should have debited prepayment account, but we didn't. We didn't enter anything. All we did was enter the credit to the sales expense account. So we need to sort it out. So we will debit the prepayment account because we want that asset of showing that we've got some airfares we can use in the future, potentially. And so we debit prepayment. So now the prepayments account is correct. And we credit suspense with 450 to get rid of it. So our journals will be, if we find prepayment in here, where's prepayments? Here we are, prepaid expenses. We'll debit that with 450 and we'll create suspense with 450. So that's the journals we are looking for. But we don't need to touch the sales expense account because that credit there has already been entered before we came along. We're only correcting the error. So we don't touch the sales expense account. We will bring in the debit of 450 into prepayment to show we've got some expenses that we can use in the future, and credit suspense because we don't want it. Does that help with that one? Again, that's quite a tricky one. Sorry, Susan. It's not 505, it's suspense. It's a suspense account. So yeah, so that's where that was. So that's got rid of the suspense. Anything else for anyone for the 5 minutes? Don't forget, we've got 25% off our online and online live whole level bookkeeping and even individual units. The discount code RS25, and that runs to end of June. Cool. Hope you found it useful. Like I say, if you haven't, well, obviously you have made it, but if you can't make any in the future, as long as you're registered, you will get sorted. Susan, there is no 505, it's suspense. So that's the suspense account. So it's everything in this question is £450. And I will see you all. Oh, don't forget, Thursday, 7 o'clock, Facebook Live on our Facebook AAT distance learning page. I'm doing Facebook Live on, what am I doing it on AQ 2021, what we know about AQ 2021. It's going to be really good. It's really interesting. And there might be some talk about a surprise or announcement that's coming out from AAT any day now. Keep an eye on your emails. I promise you. Cool. And I will see you all next week.